In chapter 9, Paul begins his apostolic defence. But he's been building up to this since chapter 4, where he talks about the ministry of the apostles. He says in chapter 4, verse 2, they must be trustworthy, verse 2. And then in verse 5, they must be commended by God. All the things that really the Corinthians were struggling with. He says apostleship is hard going, verses 10 to 13, and culminating in the apostles being like the scum of the earth. Very shocking words for a Corinthian to hear. In chapter 5, he says these apostles are not like the sexually immoral of chapter 5 or of the power brokers and those that are bringing lawsuits to their brothers and sisters of chapter 6. No. He says in chapter 7, whether married or single or widowed, you were bought with a price, therefore honour God with your body. And in chapter 8, in the meat sacrifice to idols chapter, he says arrogance of knowledge without love puffs up. But love, he says in verse 1, builds up. And this brings us into chapter 9, which is an astonishing defence of Paul's apostolic ministry. This is how all of it now plays out as far as Paul is concerned in what it means to be an apostle. So he's basically saying to the factionalists from chapter 1, you want to break up into groups? This is what apostleship is like. This is what being an apostle is. In this chapter, I want you to notice, this is just a simple reading of the text in observing what is going on. There are 18 rhetorical questions in just 27 verses. It's an astonishing barrage of questions that Paul is asking, forcing the reader in the church or the listener to be answering those questions, coming to the right conclusion themselves. He's arguing in verses 1 to 12 for the right to his rights as an apostle. He has a right to his rights, as we do in any case in so many different areas of our own lives. But in verses 12b and 15, he says he doesn't want to make any use of those rights. That could sound confusing at face value. He says in verse 16, woe to me if I do not preach the gospel. His overriding concern is the proclamation of the saving gospel of Jesus Christ. His goal? Simple, to reach everyone, everywhere, in every place, by every means. So this perspective is to counter the arrogant, self-serving, immoral, greedy, power-hungry, power games of the elite in the Corinthian church. Paul is now applying the full weight of the gospel, and there's still more to come.